Tech Talks, the People and Planet podcast. On this episode, I'm joined by Thomas Knox, the co-founder and CEO of VitVio. Thomas, hi, good morning. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me, Lee.
Thank you so much for joining us. Interested when want to talk about this. This is all about AI-powered operating rooms, isn't it? Tell us more. What's the problem that you guys solve with the mission? What's the inspiration as well?
Yeah, to be honest, Lee, right now hospitals are under immense pressure with like aging populations, rising costs, lack of medical staff. Things have never really been harder for hospitals, and they're trying to find innovative ways to help them get through this. I think COVID was a difficult time for everybody, but it really gave us a reality check that was much needed, and pushed a lot of hospitals to say, hey, the old ways of working aren't working anymore. So they're starting to adopt technology and think a little bit more innovative than they have previously. So what we do is we go into surgical operating theaters and we deploy, let's say, 5 to 10 cameras into the ceiling, maybe a sensor or two to help us with this. And we start tracking all the people, equipment, processes, fixtures, fittings, you name it. Now, with that information, you're able to get some really interesting context, such as like, what is the stage of the surgery? Has the patient arrived? Have they gone under anesthetic? Is it knife to skin? So on and so forth. Now, with that, and you combine it with some historical data, you're able to come out with runway estimates saying like, how long do we estimate until this surgery is finished? Now, why is that important? Because if you understand the stage of the surgery and the runway until it's finished, you can use that as a way to parallelize activities and work streams. So for example, when you're getting to like the last 20 minutes of surgery, you can start pinging off to the preoperative nursing staff to start prepping the next patient, or pinging off the cleaning crew to come to OR3 in the next 10 minutes. All of this, the whole idea is to try to reduce that turnaround time and reduce the risk of delays. Because if you have these delays within a surgery, you get this like death by 1,000 cuts throughout the day. And what you end up getting to is that when you're getting towards the end of the day, you either have to you have a last case cancellation, which is really bad because it means that you run out of time, you have to push that patient to another day, and you've reduced your throughput, or you run into unplanned overtime, which in the US is paid at 2.5x rate, which it causes a massive financial burden. But in the UK, it's often not paid at all extra, which then you get higher staff burnout. So it's a really big issue that hospitals globally are facing.
Nice. So this is solving multiple problems, isn't it? From the healthcare provider side of things, you've talked about the financial costs there, but you've also talked about the burnout, which is prevalent in every country pretty much that I speak to that are looking at healthcare problems. But also from the patient side of things, I think if you're that person that's kind of mentally prepared themselves for that operation, and then you get there in the hospital, and then you find out that operation is being moved to another date, whatever reason, then that's a huge kind of mental health experience as well, I would say.
Yeah, and this is the reality of every single day across every hospital, both in the US and UK. Now, even beyond this, I mean, just think about this. There is right now backlog of nearly 8 million people waiting for surgery in the UK alone, right? That's massive. That's something people are dying because of this. So, it sounds like, oh, pushing a single case out of the day doesn't sound like a major thing, but when you're doing that across thousands and thousands of operating theaters globally, or even just in the UK, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of patients that have been, delayed multiple times or having to wait longer than they would have, originally had to. So this is having a really big impact, both not just mentally, but also literally on people's lives. It's having a life or death situations where people are not getting the care that they need in the time that they need it.
Huge problem. Okay, cool. So talk to us more about the solution. Unwrap the product for us then. How does it work? What's involved?
Yeah, so I think maybe a good context to give before diving into that is to maybe talk about kind of the team and where we come from and why that's important, right?
Okay.
So as I mentioned before, what we're doing is computer vision and AI solutions for the surgical operating theater, like tracking the stages and everything. But why is it important, and where did we kind of come from this? Actually, both myself as well as my entire team come from the autonomous retail space. So we actually, if you guys have ever heard of like Amazon Go, the autonomous stores, that kind of concept, we were actually the Amazon Go's #1 competitor, a company called iFi. I was the head of product there for 3.5 years before we even had a single store, and then we scaled it up to actually surpass Amazon in the number of autonomous stores. So iFi today is the world's largest autonomous store vendor. So what we were doing is, we matured this technology. I mean, you can go test it out, go to autonomous stores and see what it's like, where you can just walk in, grab whatever you want, and walk out. It's a very similar concept or similar, let's say, use of a technology. We are using computer vision to understand the context of what people are doing within a fixed space. So essentially, it's imagine like having an additional person standing in the room just tracking and logging all of this information autonomously. One of the biggest things that we're trying to do is get away from this like manual data logging. So like, instead of having to log into an EHR when these actions occurred or having to walk out of the room to make a phone call to tell people to start triggering the next stages, we try to handle that all autonomously. What we want is that the staff are focusing on what their expertise is, which is focusing on the patient, making sure the patient is getting the highest quality of care and that they're getting it in the time that they need. Everything else, we can try to handle that autonomously.
Fantastic. And all of that's come from your background as, you've just basically lifted the autonomous retail space and put it into an operating.
Not exactly. It's a very different use case to it, but it's a similar use of technology. It's a very easy parallel to draw because people know, let's say there's not very many places globally where you can think about computer vision being deployed at scale, where people will understand what it means. However, an autonomous store is a really easy parallel to draw because it's something that most of us know about these days. We understand the concept, we know how it works. And what we're doing is taking a lot of the lessons that we learned from that. So I'd say more than taking the technology or taking like the exact whatever it may be from that and just dropping it over, we're more taking the lessons we learned and the failures that we had and bringing those over and saying, hey, let's avoid these and jump straight into the things that are the most valuable since we already know what works and what doesn't. I have such a smart team. Honestly, it's a humbling every day to be working with these guys. We've got multiple PhDs on the team who've spent their life dedicated to computer vision and AI solutions, and now coming over to this, everybody's just full on steam to try to help both hospitals as well as the patients.
Nice, brilliant. Congratulations. It sounds like a great product. I'm always interested, though. It's very rarely plain sailing with startups. Always interested to find out more about how you guys navigate challenges, what those challenges are. If you could share more on that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie and say that it's easy. When we were going into healthcare, people were saying that we must be masochists, and I would have to agree with them. The healthcare space is a very difficult nut to crack, especially maybe it's even a benefit for us coming from the outside and bringing technology into healthcare because we didn't come with all these preconceived notions that maybe would have scared us off from the beginning. No. Now, one of the things that I would say is that the biggest challenge we've been facing is just when you're a startup and you're especially like a VC-backed startup, you think in the span of 2 years maximum, and you think about how to get to that next funding round and how to build a successful business within those 2 years, and everything's a rush and you're trying to prove it. Now, hospitals, because of the fact that they are literally impacting people's lives, they think in the span of sustainability and decades, and they are sometimes risk adverse. Granted, like I said, when it comes to, luckily with the timing, is that COVID was a difficult time, but it did change a lot of people's mindset in this. A lot of the old guard retired. A lot of the newer people came in with far fewer staff and much bigger challenges than they were facing previously, which forced them to have to think in a different way, which in turn has helped us to be able to, let's say, open the doors that previously would be impossible to open. Now, that doesn't mean that things go easily. We are doing very well with this. We've only been funded for a couple months here, so we were funded about 3 months ago from some very big name VCs, and things have been moving very quickly for us. We're already deploying in NHS. We're talking to 50 plus hospitals across the NHS as well. Probably going to be deploying with a couple of those this year, as well as in the US. As soon as we went to the US, we already are talking to 5 out of the top 10 in the US, as well as 4 out of the top 10 health systems. So things are going very, very quickly, but it just takes some time. Hospitals have to be, I'm glad that they do it. Imagine you're the patient. I would want them to be very cautious and make sure that they're doing the right things. But it does pose a challenge for startups because you always want to be able to move fast. If I wanted an easy company, go build like a B2B SaaS for enterprise and, that they can move quickly. There's zero risk involved. If it doesn't work, they just turn it off. Here, if it doesn't work, their entire operations may fall, which is a risk that they have to take into consideration, something that we have to be very careful about to make sure that our solutions are top notch all the way down the line.
Got it. And so you guys are going for it in the US and the UK simultaneously.
Yes.
How are you finding that?
Well, let's say this. The US was more of a survival tactic of the UK. So originally we were going to the UK and we wanted to focus on the NHS hospitals purely because of the NHS backlog and we wanted to try to help. However, just even with that and that amount of pressure on the backlog reductions, it's just not enough to make hospitals move as quickly as you would like them to move. However, in the US, since their, let's say, drivers are a little bit, their motivators are very different. In the US, it's very profit driven, right? Like they are still a business, and you're trying to, if you can increase their their top line and reduce their expenses, overall, you're going to be able to get them to move pretty quickly. And in the US, even though they're not having the same backlogs as the UK, they are facing substantial pressure. So, for example, one of the big pressures that they've been facing is financial related. So, ever since COVID, with the aging populations, rising costs, lack of medical staff, they're facing the same problems, right? But the issue that ends up rising is that they start getting what's like called margin crunches. So their top line margin, which they already operate on like a very thin margin overall, they're now having to operate on far lower than that, which means that they're having to take other avenues to try to expand it. And that can also impact patient care, but they don't want to. They're trying as hard as they can to not impact patient care, which means they have to turn to these solutions a little bit faster than what you might see in the UK to be able to survive as a business as well. So one of the things that we did is we started going into the US just to test the market, see how it went. And things have just moved so quickly that we've decided, okay, we're going to put some efforts onto that side. We'll still keep moving the UK along because we really believe, even from just a moral aspect, we can't step out. We need to be trying to help here. Like the entire reason that we're doing this is to have a really big, to have an impact that we feel is actually meaningful. So stepping out of the UK would be something that would be difficult for us to do. And even, like I said, even just morally. But the US is kind of a, let's say, from a business perspective, it's going to be a quicker way to go. I mean, 40% of all health spend in the US, or health spend globally, is done just in the United States alone. And when you think about this, like operating theaters make up about 40% of a hospital's expenses and about 60 to 70% of their revenue. So when you're targeting an operating theater, you can have a massive impact on their operating margins. So it's something that they jump at pretty quickly.
What were those percentages again? Sorry, Thomas.
So 40% of their, on average, so of course this varies dramatically by hospital, but on average, about 40% of their expenses go to the operating theater, and about 60 to 70% of their revenue.
Wow. Okay, yeah. Interesting.
It's a very, very big part of it. So imagine if you can reduce any part of that 40%, but and increase their revenue off of it, the margin increases dramatically. So it's a very high impact area of a hospital.
Sure, got it. Okay. That's interesting. So, VitVio, funded a few months now. Things seem to be going well. What comes next? What can you share that's exciting for the listeners?
Oh, well, as I was mentioned before, it's like things are moving very quickly. So we should have some announcements coming up with a couple really big name hospitals. We already have some PRs written, as well as some, say the contracts are in the making with some of those big names as well. So hopefully in the next couple of months here, we should see that. But we also are growing our team, building out and trying to get to the state where, what we want to do for this year, just to be completely clear, is that we want to get to like a couple hospitals. We don't want to be scaling too quickly or doing anything like that. Granted, I think right now we've got the backlog to cover us for the next like 5 years plus. But I think that, the goal is get the right partners first and go make sure that as we're building this out, we're building in the right direction, and make no assumptions on this, but make sure you have the right partners. Then kind of lead us up to, so next year we can start to scale it up, build out to hundreds of hospitals and hundreds of operating theaters. But we got to get it right this year. So this year we're going to stay targeted. Next year we'll start to scale it a little bit more.
Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really interesting, and I look forward to 6 or 12 months time doing a podcast 0.20. Seeing how many hospitals you're in by then. Thomas,
thank you very much, Lee. Thank you. Have a nice day.